in Tacoma.
A family in Tacoma is still dealing with the aftermath of an alleged drunk driver who was arrested for vehicular assault. Now, according to the court documents, the suspect admitted to having 8 drinks before driving and is accused of hitting a family that was driving back home from a Mariners game. It happened last month. They were like 5 minutes away from getting home when the accident happened.
It was kind of a blur. It's like it just happened so fast. All of a sudden, it just like took a very hard turn and kind of flipped the car on its side, and I kind of freaked out.
Now, after the accident, Eugene Johnson, that was his daughter speaking, but Eugene Johnson, who was driving, spent nearly a month in the hospital. He'll be on the show later this week. He had a broken arm. Both of his feet were broken. He broke his back. And he broke his nose. He spoke with Cairo 7.
It's like it's a dream or a nightmare that's real, and I got to deal with it. I have to go through it. I'm just driving along, and that's basically all I remember. The whole left side was completely crushed. I mean, it almost looked like half a truck in the front. If she was irresponsible before, there's a good chance she may be irresponsible again, and, next time it may not be, an injury. It could be, somebody's life.
That's so incredibly important. Because in this case, the police gave the accused drunk driver a blood test, and then they had to release her the next day. In fact, they're not going to know for months what the results of that blood test actually are. Months. Due to a backlog with the Washington State Patrol, which handles these toxicology reports. Now, we have 2 labs. One's in Federal Way, the other one's in Seattle. And while they're technically not understaffed, they're understaffed. So back in April, they say they only had 4 scientists who were doing the testing. Since then, they've hired some. Now they have 11 scientists, with 10 more getting ready to do some of the work on the backlog. The problem is, training takes anywhere from 12 to 18 months, which is nuts. I feel like you can become a dental hygienist in less time. 12 to 18 months to put a little white testing strip in blood and then it turned different colors to tell you. I'm sure it's more difficult than that, but is it that hard?
A year to a year and a half? It seems
Isn't that nuts?
excessive.
They're already a scientist. We can't just give them the test strips and have them go on their merry way. Now, of course, I'm half kidding because this is complex work, especially in a state like Washington. I'll tell you why in a second, but you've got 12 to 18 months for training, which makes the average wait time 10 months, which if you're dealing with someone who is a chronic alcoholic, for example, they might be doing this every single night, drunk driving, and the only time we'll catch them is either by accident or because of an accident. Now that's a problem. And by the way, the 10 months is assuming there's only alcohol at play, because when you throw in other drugs into the mix, it can take longer than 10 months. Now, a big problem is not just this, lack of staff. It's that the testing is more extensive now because of how many drugs are out there. The more drugs potentially picked up in a sample, the more complex and lengthy the actual toxicology process becomes, the testing. We're not just testing for booze and weed anymore. Not even close. And not only do they do all the testing, but those experts, right now, again, we're working with 11 who are fully trained. They travel the state because they testify in court about their toxicology reports. So they're traveling around the state, which takes them obviously away from the office where they're doing their testing. So you throw all of that together into the mix and bam, you've got this crisis. But my God, can someone talk about the crisis at a state level and just like say, hey, we've got a problem? Can we not ship off the blood work to the blood samples to other states that maybe aren't as backlogged because you can overnight the blood. Depending on where it is you're sent. Let's look at Idaho. Are they that busy? Oregon is probably busy, but what's Idaho doing? Put it in a van, drive it over. How hard is this? How hard is this? And why is it, yet again, we've got this big crisis that no one in a position of power seems to be interested in talking about. I have to assume they know. And I remember covering a story back in April that Cairo 7 did on this very topic. It was back in April. I looked it up. It's like April 7th. So this is not new. I mean, maybe back in April, people didn't realize it. Jay Inslee was all like, huh? What have you been doing since then? Seriously, what are some of the other things you can do as we wait for the staff to be trained? And even after they're trained, they say, I believe I got an email from Washington State Patrol saying it would be about 2 months wait time on a toxicology report. Now, there are instances in which you can get a rush job done. This would not qualify for a rush job. But they don't do that often because, I imagine everyone wants to get this rushed, right? If you're the victim in one of these crimes, you want to get those details. But between now and then, you've got someone who is potentially guilty of drunk driving and or impaired driving of some kind who's just walking freely. Now, I'm told by the folks who are connected that the person might even be in this country illegally. Obviously, I can't fact check that, but you just pile it on, I guess. Let's just pile it on top of one another. And once we find out, I'm sure something will come out, prolific offender or married to one or something. There's always got to be that third, right? Can't just be two things. Got to be three.
Overachiever.
It feels like we stumble upon these pretty significant issues every other week or so, like really substantial issues. This, to me, qualifies as one. And coming from a state that has a bunch of lawmakers telling us how dire the drunk driving situation is to the point where they wanted to lower the blood alcohol level to the point where if you had like a half of a sip of a beer, you would be violating the law. I mean, just right now, because of the mouthwash I used this morning, I'm probably violating I think it was John Lovick, State Senator Lovick, put out the proposal. I would be in violation right now.
Drunk as a skunk.
I would be so drunk because I had Listerine this morning and I swallowed just a little tiny bit. I spit out as much as I could, but then there's always that first time you swallow and you're like, I didn't do a good enough job. But if we're at the emergency where we need to lower the blood alcohol level, could we maybe, put a little bit of a spotlight on this issue and come up with some kind of solution? I'm told I can find out if I have COVID or the flu or whatever else, diabetes, with a little test that I can get at the, remaining 2 drugstores in Washington. We really need 12 months of training? Or do we really? How about we just say, oh, you had 8 drinks and you're acknowledging that? Okay. I'm going to guess you're drunk, lady. I'm going to guess you're pretty drunk.
Isn't that what breathalyzers are for anyway? I mean,
it's all a scam. It's all a scam. So we'll be talking with Eugene Johnson later on this week, get a better sense of where things stand from his perspective. But he's got to be, I imagine, incredibly annoyed with this entire process. I mean, you're hospitalized for nearly a month. You've got bills, and you're just wanting to see some kind of justice. This is a guy who's lucky to be alive. And it's almost like that was the punishment, staying alive long enough to realize the system is so broken